Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. Maniac, monster, crazed. These are the words preceding MacKay's name in every article written about him. And it's how he's been described by psychiatrists since his first diagnosis as a psychopath, aged 11. But it wasn't a mental illness manageable by drugs, but an untreatable personality disorder caused by neglect and abuse, in which he would try to solve his emotional problems with violence. In his 40-page memoir written in Brixton Prison before his trial, MacKay stated,
"I only had the best intentions of living my life. But one cannot, unfortunately, always foresee certain types of stigmas that can form in such an imperfect world."
As being a boy who distrusted adults, the system, and was bounced between institutions, the only consistency in his life was solitude, violence, and drink. July 1966, age 14. 4 years after the death of his drunken father, who he idolised but never grieved, MacKay was sent to West Hill in Dartford, one of many psychiatric hospitals, where as a young boy he spent many of his formative years. January 1967, age 15, he was back at West Hill. May 68, age 16, he was at Gravesend. At October, charged with the robbery and GBH of a 12-year-old boy, he was held at Moss Side Hospital in Liverpool, hundreds of miles from his home in Kent, and bounced from Moss Side to Stonehouse in Dartford, as a succession of doctors had no idea what to do with him. How could he grow up to be normal if he'd been told that he was a maniac and a monster? Medical experts stated he wasn't mentally unwell, but plagued by depression and suicidal attempts, in which many times he tried to drown himself, stab himself, or jump in front of a train. Were they a cry for help? Were they spawned by a sense of shame? And were hospitals the only places he felt loved or accepted? Patrick MacKay, Two Sides of a Psychopath, Part C. Calling the early years of MacKay's criminal career a crime spree is a gross exaggeration. As in all parts of his life, he was an underachiever. He had jobs but no focus, an education but it was fractured. He could be charming, but he had few friends and no girlfriend. And although when he wrote he was eloquent, in every situation he was lumped in with the low IQ kids doing menial work for low pay. He drank to quieten his mind and committed crimes to quell his boredom. By 1973, age 21, although it's unlikely he murdered Heidi Manilk, and 11 days later, it's improbable that he killed Mary Hines, as arrested on the 15th of July for chasing a homeless man with a metal pole. He was held on remand at Ashford and wasn't released until the 27th of July, when he was given a 6-month suspended sentence. But he had 2 more convictions that year. 24th of September at Dartford for being drunk and disorderly, and on the 25th of October at Highgate for stealing a bicycle. Hardly the crimes of an infamous serial killer. That said, although a petty thief and a wastrel, he had found himself a job. As being 6'2" and solidly built, he was hired as a van boy for Perrins of Finchley, a furniture removals firm covering towns in the northwest borough of Barnet, including Hendon, Golders Green, Edgware Road and Finchley, where he lived with Father Ted Brack, as well as the wealthier villages like Hadley. Said to be quiet and solitary, this was one of the longest periods of employment he had, and with his bosses accepting his bouts of arrest and incarceration, it also marked a key moment in what truly was his crime spree, as the first provable incident in which he targeted wealthy old ladies had begun. In November 1973, 83-year-old actress Jane Comfort was appearing in the Agatha Christie thriller The Mousetrap at the Ambassador Theatre in London's West End. Mid-performance, MacKay snuck in via the stage door, stole £4, roughly £60 today, and he fled as she'd seen his face. Oddly, 2 months later, asking an elderly lady for directions on her doorstep at Gloucester Place. It was only after he had punched her in the face and thrown her to the ground for the sake of £40 that he realised that again, this was Jane. She gave detectives an accurate description of her attacker, later discovered to be Patrick MacKay. Just days later, in an unnervingly similar attack 3 miles south at Cheney Walk, he gained entry to the home of 84-year-old Isabella Griffiths and murdered her, marking his first confirmed kill. But in between both, did he also murder Stephanie Britton? Stephanie was the epitome of MacKay's new victims, and although younger than most, being just 58, she was a wealthy widow who lived alone. Born on the 9th of April 1916 in Barnet, northwest London, Stephanie Elizabeth Nunn lived in the picturesque village of Hadley all of her life, from birth right through to her death. As a baby, she was born in the White House in Hadley Green. She was baptised in the St Mary Virgin Church in Monk and Hadley. In her early school years, she lived on the nearby Barnet High Street as one of 3 children to Dr. John Winifred Nunn and his wife Hilda, who the census lists as a householder. As with 3 domestic servants, normally a wife would be listed as doing unpaid duties, but not here. This was a life of middle-class privilege, just a few miles from the city, but a distance from the slums, the poverty, and the choking fumes. It was a safe and serene place to live. Like her brothers, Michael and John, who ran the local doctor's surgery with his father, Stephanie was well educated, but her place in life was to be a wife and a mother. Having married in St Mary the Virgin Church at the outset of World War II to Mervyn Anthony Britton, a good man who later became a well-known solicitor at Longmoors of Hereford. Together they lived in the village of Hadley, where their 2 children, Oliver and Joanna, were born and raised. Unlike most, their lives weren't blighted by tragic pasts, as it was peaceful and calm, at least for now. In October 1969, around the time that MacKay was committed to the Moss Side Psychiatric Hospital, after more than 30 years of marriage, Stephanie was widowed when her beloved husband Mervyn passed. Emotionally, it broke her, but surrounded by everything she'd ever known, her family, her friends, her priest, her clubs, and the familiar warm bosom of the village she loved, Hadley had always been her safety net. Described as kind, quiet, generous and modest, with an immense charm, Stephanie was popular and well-liked, and was active in her local charities and organisations, like Barnet Arts Club, the Derby and Joan Club as treasurer of this OAP social club, and the Barnet Old People's Welfare Committee. With her grey hair, spectacles and neat clothes, she exuded a sense of propriety, as she cycled on an old-fashioned bicycle and was easy to spot. And hating fuss and being strong-willed, although it was said she was gentle and ladylike, she had a boisterous sense of humour, described as masculine. In 1965, with her husband still alive, they moved into a 6-bedroomed, £60,000 Georgian house called the Mercers on Hadley Green Road, worth £3.25 million today. Overlooking the soothing silence of the village green, with its gently swaying trees and its duck-filled ponds, it was her place of happiness. But by 1973, with her daughter Joanna having married and her son Oliver having moved out, the family home was too big and empty for this widow to live alone, so in the new year, she planned to sell up. Stephanie's life had changed to such an extent that, unaware of MacKay, his crimes, and his need for attention forming in the mind of this serial killer-to-be, she unwittingly became his perfect victim. She was lonely yet kind, isolated and defenseless, being a wealthy widow with a warm heart whose door was always open and whose home was full of easy-to-steal antiques, jewellery and cash. Stephanie Britton would be victim number 3 of the infamous 11. The problem was, MacKay never confessed to her killing. In fact, he vehemently denied it. But why? Friday the 11th of January 1974 was a brutally horrible day, as with temperatures barely above freezing, a bruised black sky unleashed a bitter torrent of hard hail, lashing rain and violent thunderstorms across London. Many, like Stephanie, may have chosen to wait it out inside of a warm, bright house. But on the 1st of January, sparked by a worldwide energy crisis, the UK government had introduced a 3-day week, meaning that electricity and gas supplies were strictly rationed to conserve its dwindling supply. Inside the Mercers, this oversized 9-roomed house where Stephanie lived alone, that night, it was only lit by candlelight, only warmed by a log fire, and with entertainments like television and radio off at a respectable hour. From the outside, it looked as if no one was in, except for the flicker of a torchlight. Stephanie was last seen alive by her daughter at 6:30 p.m, 2 hours after dusk, and was said to be in good spirits. She had no worries, she had no enemies, she hadn't befriended a stranger, and although these houses were often the target of professional burglars, her worldly goods weren't all on display. On the 1st of February, 3 weeks after her murder, but crucially a full year before MacKay was even on the police's radar as a burglar and a murderer of lone elderly ladies, an eyewitness in Hadley recalled seeing a man at 8 p.m. near Jocelyn's Pond, a 30-second walk from the Mercers. He was
tall, about 30, with dark short hair and wearing a long military topcoat with a belt.
MacKay was 6'2", 23 but looked older, had short dark hair and wore military-style coats, which although not unique, it is similar. At the time, MacKay lived with Reverend Brack in East Finchley, 5 stops south on the Northern Line, a short ride by bus, and having quit his job at Perrins on the 5th of January, he was unemployed and broke until the 14th, 3 days after her killing. And that day, he couldn't account for his whereabouts. Typical of his crimes, police said
there was no evidence of a break-in,
as MacKay's method was either to snatch a victim's handbag in the street, attack her on the doorstep, or using a sympathetic ploy like asking for directions, a glass of water, or to use the toilet, he would come across as a softly spoken boy. Joanna, Stephanie's daughter, later stated she was not very careful about locking up. But that night, her front door would be deliberately left off the latch, as around 8 p.m, she was expecting a visitor. Later found on the table in the sitting room, it is believed she had left a handwritten note on the front door, which read, "Alan, I'm on the telephone. Please come in. Steph." Said to be a prolific user of the telephone, she had a lot of friends locally and across the country, but all the Allens in her address book were accounted for, even though it was clear that she knew him, she trusted him, and as planned, she was expecting him. MacKay often used the alias of Peter McCann. But was he the Alan that she was expecting? If this was MacKay, what was his motive? A robbery for greed, an attack for thrills, or an accidental murder resulting in shame? Detective Chief Superintendent William Wilson of Scotland Yard's murder squad stated,
if it was an intruder, there was no need to kill a small defenseless woman. There wasn't even a dog in the house.
Found downstairs in the sitting room, not far from the phone, Stephanie was fully dressed and lying prone on the floor, identical to Adele Price and Isabella Griffiths. with a 7 to 9 inch single-edged knife with a brown handle missing from her kitchen. It was likely, but unconfirmed, that this was the weapon used to kill her, as it was never found. And yet with some early confusion over the length and type of the blade, it could easily have been the 5-inch stiletto blade that MacKay admitted he often carried. With cuts, grazes and bruises to her head and shoulders, the pathologist said there were signs of a violent struggle, as fighting for her life, Stephanie was kicked and punched to the ground by her assailant. Overpowered and helpless, 9 times he had stabbed her in the chest, her neck, her back and under her armpit, penetrating her most vital of organs like her lung and her heart. Described by DCS Wilson as
a frenzied attack. One of the worst murders I have ever encountered.
With a single ferocious strike, one of the stab wounds was so vicious, the blade had penetrated her body and the floorboard below. Again, MacKay would later state the same fact about Isabella Griffiths. But was this true? Or had he conflated the 25+ identical attacks on elderly ladies, as he had done with the murder of Mary Hines? Nothing was stolen, so either robbery wasn't the motive or he'd been disturbed. But either way, as with the other attacks by MacKay, detectives felt it was a cruel and motiveless killing. With the energy crisis making the house inordinately cold, pathologist Dr. David Bowen could only put the time of death, as she died not long after the initial attack, as somewhere between 8:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. As was MacKay's method, it looked like a robbery, but detectives felt that the room had been superficially ransacked, as if the suspect was obfuscating his crime,
as nothing of value was taken other than a kitchen knife.
But perhaps what began as a robbery had ended in a brutal murder due to something unforeseen. That night, except for Alan, Stephanie was supposed to be alone in her large empty house. But at the last minute, her plans for the evening had changed. And for one other, it would change for the worse. On the 3rd of March 1969, having previously married 32-year-old Michael Martin, Stephanie was elated that she'd become a grandmother, as her daughter Joanna had given birth to a boy called Christopher. Like his granny, being born, baptised, raised, and living his whole short life in Hadley, Christopher Jan Nicholas Martin was small, fair-haired, and described as a happy and brilliant little boy, who always smiled, eternally giggled, was quiet and bright, and was often seen helping his granny in the garden. 1 year earlier, Joanna and Michael had separated, and not wanting to disrupt his education, aged just 4, he lived with his mother at Hadley High Stone and went to Monk and Hadley Junior School. That evening, with his mother out with friends, and his father flying over from Ireland the next day to see him, Joanna had dropped him off at the Mercers at 6:30 p.m, so he could sleep, as he often did, at his granny's. It was a place he felt safe. They both did. And yet someone would devastate an entire family. DCS Wilson stated,
If it was an intruder, there was no need to kill a small, defenseless woman. And why go upstairs and kill a sleeping child? It would only delay his escape. No one in their right mind could have murdered those two.
clarifying,
No normal person could have gone to those lengths.
dressed in his pajamas and having been told a bedtime story, about 7 p.m, Christopher lay curled up in his bedroom, with the lights off, wrapped in a warm duvet, as by 8 p.m, he was sound asleep. With no witnesses to the crime, only a trail of devastation, it's uncertain What had occurred? Was Christopher sleeping as stated? Was he awoken by his granny's screams? Did he see her brutal death from the stairs? And racing back up to his bedroom, where he mistakenly thought he was safe, with the intruder not wanting to leave behind an eyewitness? Was he killed to ensure that he never spoke? Using possibly the same blade which had slayed his granny. In his bed, the tiny boy was stabbed several times. As the knife penetrated his pajamas and blanket, held over him for warmth and protection. That night, 2 murders occurred. One was the epitome of a MacKay victim, and the other was not. At an undeterminate hour, the killer left. As MacKay often did, the lights were off, but only because of the energy crisis. The front door was locked with the key taken, but the French doors at the back were open. And possibly with the killer being prone to depression and staying with the body hours after the murder. Just as the eyewitness had seen,
A tall man, about 30s, in a military-style topcoat,
walking by Jocelyn's pond at 8 p.m. Another saw a man fitting that description, leaving Hadley Green at 5:30 a.m. But was it MacKay? The next morning, with Stephanie having not returned Christopher back to his mum's house, at 10 p.m, Joanna went to the Mercers. It was a sight so horrifying, it left her traumatized until her death in 2007. On Wednesday the 23rd of January, at Monk and Hadley Church, 300 mourners attended the double funeral of Stephanie Britton and Christopher Martin, with both buried side by side at Bells Hill Funeral Ground. An incident room was set up in the top 2 rooms of Barnet Police Station on the High Street, with 30 detectives, a few desks, 2 phones, and a bookcase bowing with the weight of statements, maps and street plans. Dog handlers scoured the green. Frogmen searched the ponds. More than 3,000 people were spoken to, and over 1,000 statements were taken. DCI Joe Pallett stated,
"The biggest headache was the lack of motive. The house was ransacked. It had all the appearance of a burglary, with the thief being disturbed, but nothing was stolen. It's got all the signs of a break-in, but there were too many inconsistencies."
Again, what was clear was that the killer was a maniac. DCI Joe Pallett said,
"Whoever committed these murders was unbalanced at the time. That does not necessarily mean that we believe whoever did it is permanently unstable. But the severity and brutality of the attacks indicate a kind of frenzy."
Meaning someone who wasn't necessarily mentally unwell, but had a severe psychotic personality disorder. Local hospitals and psychiatric units were checked for missing persons. Drug addicts were questioned, as well as felons with a history of burglary and violence, but no one seemed to fit the bill. MacKay wasn't questioned. As being just a petty thief, he was yet to appear on the police's radar as a murderer. Forensics swarmed the Mercers, but with the doors left open and the night bitterly cold, they couldn't shorten the time of death window to less than 8:30 p.m. and 10 p.m. And as a very popular woman whose large house was often used as a meeting place for her many charities and clubs, more than 200 sets of fingerprints were found, one of which may have been her killer. What was clear, as DCI Pallett stated,
"Someone went to a lot of trouble to disguise these killings."
But who and why? 3 days after the discovery of the bodies, police stated that a man,
early 30s, well-built, fair hair, had spent his 3rd night at Barnet Police Station.
They refused to name him.
But he has not been detained and came to the station voluntarily.
Some have suggested that this was the police's primary suspect, or Patrick MacKay, in disguise. In truth, it was Christopher's grieving father, Michael. Having flown from Ireland, he spent 60 hours being questioned, and as must be done, was ruled out as a suspect. The tall, dark-haired man in the military-style topcoat was never identified. Or was it MacKay? On Thursday the 8th of August 1974, at Hornsey Coroner's Court, it was ruled as a murder by persons unknown. With no one charged or suspected, and every angle investigated, the case went cold until Patrick MacKay made his miraculous confession.
I killed 11 people.
On the 20th of April 1975, the Sunday Mirror declared,
Scotland Yard is carrying out one of the most sensational mass murder investigations in its history. Detectives are examining clues which could link several killings with one homicidal maniac. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Ernest Bond ordered senior detectives to make urgent inquiries based on a multiple murder theory. Originally, there were no grounds to suspect that the murders might be connected.
But one of those was Stephanie Britton and Christopher Martin, along with Mary Hines. The killing of Isabella Griffiths, his first confirmed kill, 4 weeks after Stephanie's murder, had as many similarities as dissimilarities. But as we know, MacKay's method of killing was inconsistent. Unlike the killing of Heidi Manilk, this one was sparsely covered, so even if MacKay had lied in his confession, he would still have got most of the facts wrong. Unlike in Mary Hines' murder, detectives couldn't coerce him to wrap up an unsolvable case, as he vigorously denied he had anything to do with the murder. In Psychopath by Tim Clark and John Pennycoat, it states,
MacKay is said to have confessed this crime to a fellow prisoner.
But this cannot be verified, and many details in that book are woefully inaccurate, such as claiming
MacKay had visited the house when working for the removals firm Perrins.
But why would Stephanie call a removals company when she hadn't even put the house on the market? Handcuffed and driven to the Mercers in a police van. In his memoir, MacKay wrote,
I went to view the outside of the house. However, having said that, it is my belief that they will always wonder whether I knew something about this bizarre slaying or not. The answer is, of course, that I did not.
MacKay remains the police's only suspect in this brutal double murder. And it makes perfect sense why. Stephanie was the epitome of a MacKay victim. The murder mirrors that of Isabella Griffiths and Adele Price. He was possibly seen in the area at the time of the killings. He was local. He knew the area. And the next job he got, just 3 weeks after the murder, was as a patrolling trustee, picking up litter in Hadley Green. When he was tried at the Old Bailey in November 1975, Patrick MacKay was convicted of 3 murders, Adele Price, Isabella Griffiths, and Father Anthony Crean. And of the 2 additional murders he was suspected of, confessed to, and was charged with, Stephanie and Christopher's killings weren't one of those, and they weren't left on file. In fact, the evidence against Patrick MacKay in this case was so slim, it wasn't even brought to trial. In 2012, with this cold case investigation being reviewed, MacKay still hasn't been charged. He still denies killing them both, and even the last surviving members of Stephanie's family state,
We don't think that MacKay is the killer.
But why would an attention-seeking serial killer, who had already murdered 3 and had confessed to 8 more murders, deny, in the strongest, most unwavering words, that he had anything to do with it? It could be just a game, a ploy to keep his name in the headlines, because as we know, detectives stated that MacKay was an inveterate liar. Or again, maybe he's simply mistaking one attack for another. Maybe realizing that, as a nobody who'd achieved nothing and was destined to be forgotten, now having become an infamous serial killer that he wanted to be written about like John Reginald Christie and John George Haig, but not hated like Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, the Moors murderers. Was the murder of Stephanie Britton acceptable in his warped moral code, but not the killing of her grandson? Were both killings a mistake, as there's no hard evidence to prove that the murders he was convicted of were premeditated, beyond being robberies which went wrong? And as a psychopath prone to short, powerful bursts of violent rage, followed by long periods of self-hatred and depression, are we too ready to accept his retelling of the murders in his 40-page prison memoir, which only bolsters his infamy? Maybe he vehemently denied the killing of Christopher Martin, as being routinely beaten and abused as a young boy himself. Did this killing make him realise that he was becoming his drunken, violent father, a man he hero worshipped but could never mourn? Which is strange, as MacKay did have a history of attacking young boys. As in 1967, he was charged with the assault of 2 boys on a building site by smashing their heads into the rubble. And in 1968, he attempted to strangle a 12-year-old boy who he robbed for a watch, and in which a Home Office psychiatrist described him as a cold-blooded psychopath. That said, when he attacked those boys, he was little more than a child himself. But was it all because of shame, confusion, or was he building a legacy? Part D of Patrick MacKay, Two Sides of a Psychopath, continues next week, with parts 1 of 4, covering in detail the killings of Father Crean, Isabella Griffiths and Adele Price, as well as Mackay's life, crimes and trial, available now as part of this crossover series with the True Crime Enthusiast podcast. Just search Patrick MacKay, Two Sides of a Psychopath, or click the link in the show notes.